Well, good evening, folks, and welcome back to this week's episode of Breaking the Chain. We're going to discuss aerobatics versus upset training, and we're going to have a little different format tonight, which I'll cover. Quick look at our agenda. We'll talk real quick about what the WINGS program is. We'll do some introductions. We'll talk about what we're trying to accomplish. We're going to have a question answer forum this evening. Not so much a presentation, but a question and answer forum with Miss Wagstaff. And then we'll have some closing comments. I'll also tell you how to get WINGS credit. So at the end of this presentation, I'll give you a code, send it to me in an email, and I will get you your WINGS credit issued out to you in the next couple of days. Again, this is an FAA safety team event. My program manager at the San Antonio FSDO is Mr. Ryan Newman. That is his email address. Please, by all means, send him an email on what you like or dislike about this program, how we can improve it or how we can sustain. That's Ryan's information. I mentioned WINGS credit. What is WINGS credit? Well, you can navigate through the different levels of WINGS credit by attending these webinars and seminars, and also participating in flying activity. WINGS credit will help you if there's ever an issue where you wind up getting in a accident or an incident, or you get into trouble with the FAA. It also can help potentially reduce your insurance premiums. But the real cool thing about being a part of the WINGS program is getting notifications on webinars and seminars and events like these. So follow the FAAsafety.gov URL that I have posted there. Go ahead and set up a profile and get notified of events just like this. Okay, as some of you may know, my name is Jeremy Walters, and I am a professional pilot, Gold Seal flight instructor, and a major in the United States Army Reserves, and I'm the lead FAST team representative within the San Antonio FSDO area. I fly a Hawker and a King Air, and I also teach professionally. That is my true passion. And I'll tell a little quick story about tonight's guest. Back in 2002, whenever I was working the flight line in Summerville, South Carolina, I was fueling airplanes by day and working on my CFI by night. And lo and behold, about 2 days before my CFI check ride, a extra 300 with a tail number 68 Papa Whiskey comes right up onto my ramp and requests fuel. And as we all know, it was Miss Wagstaff, and we chit-chatted it up a bit. She gave me some pointers and gave me some good feedback to be ready to take my exam 2 days later, which I went and aced first time. And I'm still instructing, still getting back. I'm also I'm not currently flying in the military, but I flew H-64 Apache Longbows in Afghanistan. I deployed with the 101st Airborne Division out of Fort Campbell, Kentucky to eastern Afghanistan. I've done some other things that I don't really chat about in a public forum with aviation. And as you can see there, I'm not hovering on the water. I'm standing on a walk line between two floats out on Lake Buchanan when I was teaching a student in float planes. So that's a little bit about myself. I'm assisted by Paul Nadal, instrument-rated private pilot, aircraft owner. He participates in Angel flights, and he's a U.S. Navy veteran from Desert Storm. Paul is my technical guru. He helps keep these presentations going smoothly. So, what is breaking the chain? Well, we all know that there is a human factors error chain that leads from the receipt of a mission to an accident or an incident. This program, Breaking the Chain, is to promote and create a aviation safety conscious environment. We're fostering and promoting aviation safety. In other words, we try to start out on the flight, avoid this right here, which is an accident, by breaking the links of the human factors error chain and ending or preventing that accident from ever happening. So how do we do that? We do it by research, planning, training, always training, being self-aware of our human factor flaws, you know, taking a good self-analysis of what we're doing and what we're trying to do when we go fly. Thinking like a professional aviator. What does that mean? Doing the right thing when nobody's watching and maintaining a break in the chain mindset. Now, a lot of times we see and hear of accidents happening, and we sharpshoot the pilots and we just jump all over the pilots for making a mistake, instead of taking what happened from the accident or incident and applying it to ourselves to identify the errors, the error chain, and remove or mitigate the errors to prevent an incident or an accident from ourselves. And that's what we're trying to do here, is walk away with a break in the chain mindset. So this evening, our guest speaker, who will be here for Q&A, is the National Aerobatic Champion and Aviation Hall of Fame inductee, Miss Patty Wagstaff. Throughout Patty's career, she's been a dedicated aviation educator and performer in the mastery of aerobatics, performing at every major air show to include AirVenture in Oshkosh, Wisconsin, Sun and Fun in Lakeland, Florida, and her company, Patty Wagstaff Aviation Safety LLC, is based in St. Augustine, Florida. And she trains pilots from all over the world in aerobatics, airmanship, and upset training. She continues working in the aviation field as an air show pilot, stunt pilot for films, consultant, flight instructor, and writer. Wagstaff is an emeritus board member of the Smithsonian Institution of National Air and Space Museum and was on the Presidential Advisory Committee to the Centennial of Flight Commission. Currently, a film series on aerobatics is being released in collaboration with Sporty Pilot Shop. So tonight, it is my distinct honor to introduce our guest, Patty Wagstaff. Patty, welcome to Breaking the Chain. It is such a pleasure to have you here tonight.
Thank you.
We'll get started.
Pleasure.
Yeah, sorry for the delay too. As I mentioned earlier, I have satellite internet. So to get things started, first of all, why don't you tell us a little bit about how you got into aviation and at what point did you decide it was going to be part of your life?
Well, I'm an airline brat. So my dad was an airline pilot since I was very young, since I was about 4 years old. He was in the Air Force before that. And I just always loved flying with him and traveling. And so I've been very lucky that I got into aviation. Aviation's kind of my happy place. So, yeah. Just one thing leads to another. What's that?
I said likewise.
Yeah, you know how it is. So yeah, and when you grow up around it,
my heart.
I think people who grow up around it are even more apt to get into it than people who don't. So I always admire people who didn't grow up around aviation who got into it. I'm always very curious about what sparked that and how they got started, because for the rest of us who grew up around it, it just seems like the normal thing to do.
Gotcha. So Patty, what was it that got you into aerobatics? Was there something that kind of set it apart from the different types of flying out there?
Oh yeah, I was always fascinated by aerobatics, and I had never seen them, but I always thought, if I'm going to fly, that's what I want to do. And when I was getting my ratings in Alaska, I didn't have anybody up there to teach me. So I went to an air show and I went to a contest and said, it was really going to my first air show that I said, that's what I want to do. That's exciting. I can do that. And it just sparked something in me, and I took lessons, and one thing led to another, and I just, here I am still doing aerobatics.
On the topic of aerobatics, one of the things that we have been discussing in our dialogue through communication throughout the last few weeks is talking about what the difference is between aerobatics and upset training. Can you elaborate a little bit on that and go into some detail on that for us?
Yeah, aerobatics versus upset training is kind of an interesting subject. When I first started, upset training is fairly new concept. And when I first started hearing about it, I was not a believer in it. I thought, oh, come on, just learn some basic aerobatics and you'll know how to control a plane in all axes, and you won't worry about, getting into trouble. You'll know what to do. But the more I spoke to people who were already doing it and who were believers in it, the more I became a believer in it. And it took a while, but I really feel that it's a really important facet of aviation training, as well as aerobatics. And the big difference is with aerobatics is something that you can do and you can perfect for the rest of your life. You can always get better. You can always, learn more. And, a good aerobatics course is about 5 to 10 hours, really about 10 hours before you can solo in aerobatics. So, you learn all the basics and then you put these maneuvers together and so on. And an upset training is different in that it's a short, it's intense, but it's short. It's a short course. So, and it's specifically designed to give a pilot tools on how to stay out of trouble if they get into trouble. So you can, like we have an upset training course that's 1 day, it's 2 flights, it's about 3 to 4 hours of ground school. And I feel that we're giving people really good tools to stay out of trouble. Now, some of them want to come back and pursue aerobatics. They really like it. And some people never will. They're only doing it because they want to know how to stay out of trouble. So there's quite a big difference, but I think there's a place for both types of training.
Gotcha. So while we're on that subject, what are some of the scenarios that you can think of that would create an upset attitude situation?
The upsets, there are really 3 different causes of upsets. One are environmental causes. That might be wake turbulence, which is one of the main causes of upsets. Mountain waves, just clear air turbulence, anything like that can cause an upset. It can be surprising how quickly something can happen, especially if you're flying around mountains or bad weather, or so on and so forth. Downbursts, if you get too close to a thunderstorm, all the things that we're not supposed to be doing, but those things can cause upsets. The other one are system anomalies. A trim failure, let's say, that's not uncommon. It's killed a lot of people having trim failure and not being able to control the airplane after something like that. That's a good example of a system anomaly. There are autopilot anomalies and things like that too, and a number of other things, of course. And then there's human factors, the human induced upset, causes of upsets like distraction, fatigue, letting your guard down, setting your autopilot up wrong, those kind of things. So those are 3 different causes that they really break down into those causes.
So, Patty, like I said to you before we opened it up to the public, I'm an ATP, Gold Seal CFI in both airplanes and helicopters. And just until recently, my very good friend, Glenn Chappie, who's actually dialed in tonight as a participant, took me up in an extreme decathlon and put me through some basic aerobatics. And I got to admit, it was pretty awesome. I had a great time with it. Even with all the military time I had in the Apache, I never did any rolls or loops or anything like that. We actually filmed it, and I'm planning on releasing it to my YouTube channel here in a few weeks. But the one thing that stood out to me was in that whole experience is how I made the incorrect intuitive responses initially until I had to train it out of me. And so what are your thoughts on why a more seasoned aviator would need to get some more basic aerobatic training other than that's required by the FAA for a practical test?
Well, if you look at upset training, one of the biggest thing that we try to get across, if there's only one thing that we teach somebody in a course, if they don't get anything else out of it, we teach them not to pull back when they get into trouble, when they get upside down or they get into a steep bank. The worst thing you can do is pull, and that's our human nature. It's actually got a name. It's called a Moro reflex, and it's something you're born with. They take an infant, and the doctor will hold it in their hand and see if it clutches. It's called the clutch reflex when it's dropped or simulated dropped, you know. And so that's what we do when we're scared and when we're faced with something like that. We want to pull, we want to clutch, and we want to pull back, and that's where people get in trouble. So if we can just teach people to push the stick forward, neutralize it, unload, fly the airplane, get the airplane under control and fly it out rather than pull and maybe pull into the ground, then that's probably the most important thing that you'll learn. But you can't learn that in a simulator, and you can't learn it by thinking about it. You have to go and experience it. And I've seen some really experienced pilots who know better, who know what the control input should be, and they've been in a simulator, and you put them in this situation where all of a sudden they're sort of upside down or close to upside down, and they pull, and they're like, I can't believe I did that. I did, you know, they're really highly experienced pilots. And you're like, I know, but that's what we do as people, and that's why you have to be in an airplane. And it's not just that, there's other things too, but that's probably the most important thing. In a simulator, you don't have sweaty palms, you're not afraid, you know it's going to turn out okay, and you're going to, you know, close the door and go get a beer. But when you're in an airplane, it's a different story. So that's why it's so important for everybody to get this training.
Gotcha. Awesome. So what are your thoughts with conducting forward slips with any portion of the flap sim? Is that a good idea, or any precautions there?
You know, the planes that we teach in don't have flaps. So I would say each airplane is different. Some airplanes are placarded against doing, you know, doing slips with flaps. I'd say you'd have to look at your own POH and figure out what your airplane is. I think that most airplanes can do slips, and I have slipped airplanes with flaps, no problem. But again, it's it's something to look at. I know I've slipped Barons and Texan 2s and, you know, the Tucano and Bonanzas and Cessnas, they all slip beautifully. You can do a side slip or a forward slip with any of those airplanes with some flap down. So probably if it's a conventional plane, it's probably okay, but I'd hate to say that for every airplane.
Right.
You know, I mean, Jeremy,
so on the topic of
King Air, I'm sorry. What about the
I'm
King
sorry,
Air?
I
The one that you fly, does it have a T-tail? Or is it a
it does.
T-tail? It does. Are there any,
It has a
any
T-tail.
restrictions with that?
Yes, it does have a T-tail.
So are there restrictions with slips with that type of tail?
No, ma'am. No,
Okay.
ma'am.
Yeah, I don't know.
So it was just a question one of the viewers wanted to ask, and it's a good question. And, you know, like you said, check the POH, see what the POH says more than anything. A lot of times you'll see the words avoid versus prohibited, and there's some debate, obviously, on what avoid means versus prohibited, you know. So at the end of the day, am I a test pilot? I guess that's the real question, and I'm not. So on the topic of flaps, what are your thoughts on deploying flaps during a turn, say like the base to final turn?
Oh yeah, that's like a fighter pilot turn. You know, for aerobatics, I've flown planes where it's you can really tighten up the turn by dropping a notch of flaps, 10 degrees of flaps, and you can really crank it around. But that's different than what you're talking about. I think you have to be careful dropping flaps in a turn. We had a split flap situation in our Baron a few years ago. I wasn't in the plane, my ferry pilot was, and he took off. He was coming to get me. He had picked it up from the paint shop and everything was fine. Flew back from Ohio to Florida, and then was flying to another airport to pick me up a couple of days later. And the weather was bad, so he turned around and put flaps down in a turn and had a split flap situation. It scared the heck out of him. He was really, he was shaking when he landed. Because it's not something that's kind of insidious. You don't always know what's happening. You just know that the airplane's trying to pull you over, you know, trying to pull you to one side. So he got it on the ground, and we found out that some paint got into the actuator, the flap actuator, and it flipped the O-ring and jammed the rod, the actuator rod. So Since then, I've never put flaps down in a turn because of that situation. It can happen, and I think it's probably not a good idea.
Cool. We see a lot of accidents from, loss of control whenever people are turning base or turning final or whatever the deal with it is, both with and without flaps. Is there any particular prevention for those maneuvers that you can think of as far as like, keeping pilots sharp, and what should they kind of keep in their mind as they do this?
Yeah, absolutely. And, it's not a function of flaps, and it's not a matter of bank. It doesn't matter how much bank you have in. It's whether you're coordinated or not. And I know that everybody knows who Rich Stoll is and all the incredible work he's done with spins and emergency maneuver training. And he has an initiative called Learn to Turn. And that's part of it, is if you're coordinated and you get too slow, the airplane is designed to stall straight ahead. You're going to have a little warning. If you're not coordinated and you have that, especially in a skid, and you have that bottom rudder in there, the airplane will go over in the direction of the rudder very, very quickly. It's almost like a snap roll. And we demonstrate that to people up high in the first lesson that we give them. Skidding, it can also happen in a slip if you have the nose up too high. So we don't do slips without the nose on or below the horizon. But if you're not coordinated, the airplane, you really are a test pilot. There's no stall speed, for one. You can't look at the airspeed and go, well, I'm close to stall speed, or the stall warning's going off. That's not necessarily going to help you, because when you're uncoordinated, you're skidding the plane around, you're not going to get the same response. And your stall speed is changing constantly depending on bank angle and load factors. The biggest thing is to keep that ball in the center and don't stare at the ball. Keep your eyes outside, keep your butt in the square in the seat and feel it and really get a feel. Go up and play with the rudder, step on a little rudder, feel yourself sliding one way or the other. And get some training where you can do accelerated stalls or cross controlled. But that's what's going to get you. Don't mean to lecture. I get excited about this stuff.
Yeah, me too. And I love the scenario driven stuff. I'm gonna ask a little different question from one of our viewers. And if ever in a situation where you were to enter inadvertent icing conditions and you're not equipped with the necessary equipment to rectify the situation, you would obviously want to get the aircraft to warmer air or on the ground ASAP. Are there any maneuvers you would recommend avoiding in that scenario, and why?
Boy, icing is a whole nother ball game. It's very, very dangerous. I would say you have to avoid getting too slow. Add some knots, go fast, and get out. Today with the weather reporting that we have today compared to what it was like when I learned to fly in 1980. There's almost, I can't say there's no excuse, because we can all get in trouble, but there's almost no excuse to not fly, to fly into icing conditions anymore, because the weather reporting is fantastic. Right on your phone, you should be able to know what the temperature is, if there's freezing rain, so on and so forth. The big thing with staying safe in aviation is to always leave yourself an out, and that goes for icing, and also I wouldn't fly into known ice with a plane with icing, ice, whether it's boots or Fiki or any of that. I wouldn't, why fly into known ice? I mean, it's one thing if you're in a jet or a turboprop, but in a piston airplane, if you pick up ice, you can either climb out of it or descend if you have the height, but keep your speed up. Number one.
Gotcha. So one of the things that I've heard some new aviators say, and they kind of reiterate what the CFI tells them, right? Which is they power for altitude and pitch for airspeed. Obviously in the Baron, that was working on my multi-engine in a Baron as well on a B-55, right? And the CFI just like beat that into you. What are your thoughts about that? As far as, obviously one, it kind of goes to the other in relation to the drag curve, but what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, pitch for airspeed, that's number one. And that's why if you do get too slow, it's not a matter, if you get into a stall situation, it's not a matter of slamming on the power, because that will introduce more torque, and sometimes it makes the plane harder to control. Definitely unload, push the stick forward, neutralize, then add power. Even same thing with the go around. Of course, you want to smoothly add power, but you want to get the nose down first. The first thing you do in a go around is push the stick forward, get level, add power, and then climb out. Don't slam the power in with the nose pitched up. People get in a lot of trouble that way. You know, and they're staring at their instruments too when they're doing it. So they're not even looking outside. There's a lot of these, you know, G1000s that are huge. So does that answer?
Yeah, no, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, no, I've heard it said so many times over, and you kind of, you think about it, you kind of smile a little bit, especially whenever you start going through some advanced training as far as, kind of what is the relation and how does it work? No, that was actually really good.
So I always think about, what if you don't have power? You still can fly the plane. So I got a call from a friend of mine the other day. He's a very experienced pilot, and he was flying an A36 Bonanza off the coast, just north of here near Jacksonville. And there was bad weather. It was about 1,000-foot overcast, and there were some cells, some rain showers. And the approach asked him if they said they had to vector him around whether did he want to go offshore or stay or turn inland, and he said inland. And right after that, his engine quit. He blew a rod. There was a hole in the engine, hole in the case after he landed, and he was prepared on ForeFlight. He had his iPad in the plane, and he hit the glide, best glide button up there, and it showed him the path all the way to Jackson International. He put it down, walked away, descended through an overcast with no power, and so you're not always going to have it.
No, absolutely, absolutely. All right. So Jeremy, I am going to jump into the Q&A here real quick, if that's all right.
Yeah, I've got one right here. So that actually would be really scary to have to descend through a layer with no engine, and yeah, that would be insane. But on that note, what was one of your scare yourself situations and that you'll never do again, and what did you take away from it?
Probably my most frightening times in an airplane are flying in bad weather. And when you're going to air shows, you're flying these little VFR only planes and limited fuel, so you don't have a lot of options. And my kind of credo in aviation is to always leave yourself an out. And if you can poke your nose into some weather, and you can check it out, but you've got to have an out. You've got to be able to turn around or to land. So I've pushed weather a lot, and I've always left myself an out. But there are times, sometimes you push a little too far, you get in, the weather surprises you, maybe like inadvertent icing, I guess. And I've never had to land off airport, but I've been the most nervous flying in bad weather. So yeah, we all have, air show people, aerobatic people.
Gotcha. So one of the other questions in here is actually kind of a funny thing, because you brought up being a dietitian earlier. So what are some of the dietary?
Yeah.
Yeah. A nutritionist. That's what it was. Yeah. So this is actually a dietary question.
Okay.
So what kind of dietary tips do you have before you do upset training?
We tell people to eat really lightly the first flight, but eat something like a bagel or some pancakes. Don't eat anything don't eat greasy sausage, don't, and just keep, just go light. And then after the flight, eat something carby or sugary. G's tend to lower blood sugar, surprisingly. I don't know why, but they do. And so you want to eat something like granola bar, sandwich, something like that. So airshow people, or aerobatic pilots, before we fly, we eat a lot usually. We eat before we fly, because it lowers your blood sugar and lowers your G tolerance if you don't have anything in your stomach. So it takes a while to get used to it. So carbs.
Carbs. I love carbs.
Yeah, I know. We all love carbs. Bad.
I do too. So yeah, and you mentioned that you had just done some videos with Sporty Pilot Shop, and I watched that recent video where you took off out of St. Augustine. Really cool stuff, as always.
Thank you.
One of the questions is, and you mentioned this in your video, but I'll go ahead and ask this question. Were you natural to G-forces, or did you have to work up into it when you started? And I actually asked that same question of you 18 years ago directly.
Really? Yeah, I mean, everybody has to build up to it. It's not something you can just walk out and, you know, just not do for 6 months. You have to stay in shape. You have to stay in condition, especially for negative Gs. Positive Gs aren't too hard, but negative Gs where you're upside down and you're pushing and all the blood's going into your head, it's critical that you stay in condition for that. A lot of people have kind of hurt themselves. You break blood vessels in your eyes, you can get dizzy, that kind of thing, if you're not careful with it. So it's a constant conditioning. And the longer you lay off, the harder it is to get back into it. So you can't take too much time off it. So yeah, it's pretty critical. And also you have to know the difference between going from negative to positive Gs, because the blood doesn't stabilize or equalize as quickly. So if you push negative Gs and then you pull right after that, you can get gray and you have to tense up harder. So there's more to it than just the individual Gs. You have to know how to put the sequence together and be prepared for it. So yeah, it's a full-time job.
So I can tell you, I'm getting sweaty palms just listening to you talking about doing positive, negative Gs. I'm not even in I'm not even in an airplane right now. Hey, one of the guys that actually asked, what are your suggestions for CFIs who want to put together upset prevention recovery training program?
So you can do quite a bit in a non-aerobatic plane, you know, like a 172. There's some things you can do. You can teach slips, you can teach skids, you can do some, you know, cross control stalls, you can do spins, but of course you have to get the training for it. And sometimes we get students who want to get their spin endorsement, but they're looking for the cheapest place to go and the shortest amount of time. And we're like, well, we can try and do it in an hour, but it might take you 2 hours. You know, everybody's different. And so don't scrimp on that kind of training. That's really important. And what you can teach to your students, it's a good investment. And it might keep you out of trouble as well. You know how the students are always trying to kill you, right? That's what CFIs always say that. Of course, it's not true, but you have to be on your game and you have to be careful because, you know, people don't know what they're doing sometimes. So it's a good investment. Get a 5-hour course if you can. We've had a couple of master CFIs come and fly with us too, which is a huge honor for us. And yeah, go get the training. It's important. There's a big gap there. You know, there's a gap in flight training right now. I mean, up to the 70s, we had instructors that came out of World War II that were required to do quite a bit of aerobatics before they soloed. And then that sort of went away. And then now a lot of CFIs have, you know, maybe just done 1 or 2 spins in their life. So we need to sort of catch up with that.
Patty, it sounds like I need to bring my box of GoPros and come to St. Augustine and go fly and do your course is what it sounds like.
You can do that. You can use our GoPros too, but
that'd be awesome.
Love you to come fly with us.
So did you ever have any system problems or close calls? And if so, how did you handle it or fix it? Have you ever had an engine failure or anything like that? Or
yeah, I've been pretty lucky. I've had blown a couple of, you know, pistons and things like that, flying aerobatics, and I've always been able to get it on the ground. I've had a couple of prop over speeds that kind of spun the main bearing and been able to get it on the ground. I had one go at Chicago one time. I was over the water, but I was able to get it back to the airport, and like, great, you know, over the water, just what you need. And I had an incident in a Bonanza about a year ago, actually almost to the day, where I had a brake lock up and we went off the runway and hit a berm and we flipped upside down. And that was the first real accident that I've ever had. So yeah, I've had some incidents, and, you know, that one wasn't particularly fun, but so yeah, you know, you fly long enough and you're going to run into things, and of course you got to be prepared to react. It's the first time something happens, maybe something small, you know, when you first start flying and you start building time and you have 500 hours or whatever, you don't know how you're going to react until you have something, you know, something doesn't feel right, or the tank's leaking, you forgot to put the cap on, something. And you react the right way, you get it on the ground, and then you know that all the training that you've had kicks in and that you're going to react the right way. It's a good feeling, it gives you confidence.
Absolutely.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it totally does. It totally does. And I think we've all had that, oh Lord moments in airplanes, right?
Yeah.
Through training. And one of the things that's, one of the guys that actually asked a pretty interesting question on here, like, you watch the Red Bull races where they're going, right? And they're 160 knots and all of a sudden they go to pull a turn and they wind up stalling the airplane. Some of the private pilots kind of think that, you can't stall it because you're going fast enough. Can you explain that to where some of the newer private pilots could actually understand what a stall is to the wing set?
Yeah, you can stall at any speed. I mean, you can stall going straight up, you can stall going straight down, you can stall at 200 if you pull enough G's. So it's all about load factor. It's about how many G's you're pulling. And what it's really all about is angle of attack. And until you've experienced, that's another reason to get some kind of aerobatic training. So here's an example. We tell students, look, you can stall going straight down and you can stall going, you can stall on all of these attitudes, and until they've actually experienced it in say a loop, or they're coming around a loop and they pull too hard on the backside of a loop and the plane stalls going straight down. And then maybe it stalls again. And they're like, that's the first time I've ever seen that. I didn't believe it. And now I actually see it and I understand and I know what you're talking about. But so it's just when you exceed the angle of attack for that particular airspeed. So yeah, the Red Bull racers, they pull a lot of G's and they get penalized when they over G the plane too. And I think they can pull 10. I might be wrong, but I think 10 is the max that they're allowed to pull. And so, but these planes are built for it. These are not just your ordinary plane. They have a symmetrical airfoil. They're very, very strong. They're certified. Well, they're stressed of more than 10 G's. The extra that I fly is certified to plus and minus 10 G's. So it's not you couldn't do that in a normal airplane.
Speaking of extra, what did you actually start your aerobatic training in when you, and I think you already touched on this, but can you highlight again when the aerobatic bug bit you?
Yeah, I started in a decathlon, just a regular 150 horse decathlon. I loved it. After I went to an air show, said, that's what I want to do. I was on the other side of the fence, on the spectator side. I was in Abbotsford with my husband at the time. And I watched the performers and how they interacted with each other and all these cool airplanes. There was a BD-5 jet and Jimmy Franklin was there, and there were some cool warbirds, and I forget who else was there, but I just really I had always wanted to be in the circus. So I just really liked the scene and just the way these people were interacting and the flying, and it looked like everything, that I wanted to do. And I've heard other people say that. I went to an air show and I saw that and I said, that's what I want to do. So I went home to Alaska and found somebody to teach me, a woman named Darlene Dubé, and she had a 150 horse decathlon and I took a 10-hour course. So.
Awesome.
Yeah, you got to start somewhere, right? Whatever.
Well, and the cool part about it is you actually followed through on your dream. I always want to be an astronaut, and the best I can do is a background in a Zoom meeting. So that's okay.
A good background.
Yeah, a good background. Good background.
Well, I was lucky. I was able to follow through on it. My family supported it, and it was a good time in life for me to achieve something or to go for something, and so all the the cards kind of fell into place for me.
Gotcha. So somebody else had asked a question here, and it's actually it's a pretty common thread. A lot of pilots, they white knuckle the yoke, waiting for the plane to inadvertently spin. Right. It's one of the fears that so many pilots have. At what point in a new pilot's training do you recommend doing an upset recovery course? And then along with that question, as far as what are your thoughts on actually getting into a spin certified airplane to actually do spins for new pilots? So the difference between scaring somebody to where they never want to get in an airplane again and actually being proficient.
Well, we get requests sometimes from student pilots, but we like people to have a private pilot's license first, just because I think they're going to get more out of it, than if they're a student pilot. Because as a student pilot, you haven't even taken your check ride, yeah, you have a lot going on and it may be too much. But we get students who are too young. Their parents bring them, or they've been flying with their parents since they were little kids, and they come and take lessons before they have their license, and they'll take a 10-hour course of aerobatics. So it really kind of depends on the student and what their background is and so on and so forth. But if you're an adult and you're at the age where you can get your license, I think get your license if you have the chance and you're learning to fly in a Cub or maybe even a 172 or 152, and you have a good instructor that is comfortable with that stuff and they can make you feel comfortable, there's certainly nothing wrong with it.
So one of the instructors just asked, if as an instructor, what is the best scenario that you can think of that can put a student in an unusual attitude?
I guess it depends on the airplane. The way we start it is with accelerated cross-control spin, stalls. So our syllabus for our first lesson, whether it's an aerobatic course or an upset course, is pretty much the same. We go up and do some steep turns, maybe some climbing turns, just get the feel of the plane, let the student get comfortable in it, comfortable with the nose, the nose attitude and how the trim feels, that kind of thing. And then we'll slow it down. We'll do some stalls. We do fairly nose high pitch up stalls. So they get a deep stall, let them stall it with the stick all the way back and recover without using power to recover. Do a few of those because they're used to slamming the power on, and we don't want people doing that. And then easing the power on as they start climbing out and getting comfortable with that and seeing how the rudder work is. And then I'll demonstrate some stalls and turns to show them that if you're coordinated, the airplane will just go straight ahead. I can almost take my hand off and it'll recover straight ahead whether I'm in a turn or not. And then after that, we'll start, usually because we do some pretty, we have aerobatic airplanes, so we're able to get into a pretty good accelerated stall, a cross control stall. I'll usually teach the student how to do an aileron roll after that. I know you can't do that in every airplane and wouldn't recommend it, but just pitch the nose up, aileron, let it roll, because I want them to see how the aileron responds and how much aileron they actually have to respond. And then the next thing we do for upsets is we put them in cross control stalls, and I demonstrate what happens if you have a skidding rudder or slipping rudder, just to show them how quickly and how different it is than a coordinated turn. So it all goes back to that base to final turn. If you don't have, if you're not in a plane with an inverted system and, an aerobatic plane, whatever, then I would say just do the stalls, do turning stalls, demonstrate that if you're coordinated, you'll go straight ahead. It's a very predictable, easy maneuver, and then maybe start putting a little bit of skidding rudder and let the wing drop, and show your student how quickly that wing can drop. And just do it with partial power, about half power when you're doing those, and demonstrate them. I would do that. And that way they'll see, wow, I better keep the plane coordinated, and then they'll really start to understand it. I hope that's helpful.
No, absolutely. It absolutely is. So throughout your flying career, have you ever had a situation that's affected your confidence or has impeded your progression throughout your flight career? And if so, how did you manage it?
I'll tell you, when we had the accident in the Bonanza last year, it affected my confidence because I'd never had an accident. I'd been in an accident a long time ago, but it was before I learned to fly. And it was very similar. It was different, but we ended up upside down. And but that wasn't anything I did. And this wasn't my fault. It was a mechanical issue, but it affected my confidence. And it still chinks away a little bit at it. So I've had to think about it a lot. And I actually find it helpful to when I'm dealing with people that have had accidents, and I have maybe more empathy in what they've been through and their confidence level, how it gets shaken, because flying's always been my happy place. When I'm in an airplane, I'm in my safe zone, and nobody can touch me. I've got everything under control. I don't have to pay the bills. I can just concentrate on flying. And when you have something, it's hard. And you really have to think through it and meditate on it and allow yourself to go through the process. I had to go through this little PTSD process where I actually felt sore. You know, my muscles felt sore. It was strange. I got real tired. I wanted to sleep. And I had another instructor with me in the plane, and we compared notes, and we went through a pretty similar thing. And we'd wake up in the middle of the night and kind of obsessively go over everything. And I think that for me, going through that process and then getting kind of spit out the other side made me understand it a lot more. And I think if I hadn't gone through that process, that PTSD process, I might be sublimating some of those feelings. So I think it's important. Don't fight it.
And Patty, I've been involved, not in an aircraft accident myself, but I've been, as an owner, I've dealt with losing an aircraft. And I've also, unfortunately lost several friends in this business. And what you're touching on is exactly why I'm doing what I'm doing, is to give back, is to make a difference, is to hopefully save someone's life one day. On that topic, with regards to training, spins, you're not required to do spin training until you are going up for your CFI.
Right.
What do you think about private pilots getting spin training? And do you think that maybe there should be a push to incorporate some sort of spin training syllabus into private pilot training, besides the basic spin awareness and recovery that we're required to give in ground for private pilot? What do you think about that?
Well, it's a tough one because, I think everybody should experience a spin, private pilot or not. My feeling on it is, do you want to fly the rest of your career? Well, it doesn't matter if you have a private license or not. A lot of people have private licenses and they're very accomplished pilots, or instrument pilot, private instrument, that kind of thing. I can't imagine flying a whole career wondering what if, And when I was getting my ratings and I didn't have anybody teach me aerobatics, I was like, what if this happens? How am I ever going to know what to do? I can read about it, but am I going to react right? And so after I took aerobatic lessons, I'm like, oh, okay, it's no big deal. I know how to recover from a spin now. So just from that alone, to give a pilot confidence, it's so important to go and experience a few of these things. You just go pay somebody to, an accomplished instructor, somebody that's comfortable with it, and get your license. If your instructor isn't comfortable with it, go find somebody that is, because you don't want to be wondering what if. It's just got to be wearing on you. It would on me. I don't know if the FAA is ever going to go for the spin requirement or not. There's been a lot of people that have, there's been a big push to do that, but I haven't seen any movement in that direction, whether the FAA would ever require it. But, there's a lot of things we do that the FAA doesn't require. Or it's like, yeah, we're not required to brush our teeth, but we do, right? So we're not required to get spin training, but you can get it. So of course I'd encourage everybody to do that.
So with that, having flown a very accomplished career, what is something that you know now that you so wish you knew when you were a new pilot? Is there anything that's like jumps out at you?
Good question.
God, I wish I knew that years ago.
Growing up around aviation, I took a lot of interest in my dad's manuals and flight manuals, and he'd let me help him with his check rides. And again, I always felt real comfortable in it. I probably should have become an airline pilot 10 years ago or 20 years ago and had a pension and all that. Maybe that's what I should have done. I think I would have had more security and so on and so forth, but I couldn't picture myself doing it at the time. It's a really good question. I don't know. I have to think about that one.
Absolutely.
I mean, I do know that aviation keeps you very humble, and I probably knew that all along because I'd hear my dad saying it, but I think you go through, everybody said when you're 500 hours, you go through this. When you're 1,000 hours, it's very predictable. When you have 5,000 hours, you think you're good. And that's when things bite you. And that's when you get overconfident. So, and is even if you know it ahead of time, you still can't avoid those periods of time, those periods where that overconfidence creeps in. I don't even think it's complacency. I think it's overconfidence that gets people more than complacency. So
what you're saying is, if you ever get arrogant, just go step in an airplane. It'll
yeah,
knock
exactly.
you down.
Exactly. It'll humble you sooner or later.
Roger that. Is there any difference between unusual attitude recovery or upset recovery, or is it just a matter of severity? What's your opinion on that?
It's just semantics. It's the same thing. I mean, I don't like to use the term unusual attitude because I feel like if you know how to do aerobatics, there are no unusual attitudes. Like I don't have there's no unusual attitudes, not really. It's only unusual if you're not used to it. So I don't really use that term myself, but it's the same thing. Upset training is recovering from unusual attitudes, if you want to put it that way. And they are unusual if you're not used to them. So there's no big difference.
So you've flown probably hundreds of flights throughout your career. What is the most memorable flight that you've had?
I've had some amazing experiences. I've been very, very lucky. One of the most memorable is flying the Apache Longbow. We were talking, Jeremy and I were talking about that at Farnborough, and going up with Rich Lee, one of the test pilots, and I had to get permission from the State Department for him to take me flying. That was amazing. I got to fly upside down over the Volga River about a month after the fall of the Soviet Union with a world champion, Victor Smolin, in a yak. I'd fly in Kenya. I've flown some amazing places in Kenya. I've flown up to 18,000 feet in a Husky around the top of Mount Kenya. I've flown down to Mexico and El Salvador and Honduras in my extra. I don't know that there's one, I've been extremely lucky and unfortunate, to have all these amazing opportunities, but I've taken advantage of them too, I've always been ready to take advantage of that next cool, exciting adventure.
That's awesome. So what's the most challenging aerobatics you've ever done?
It's really challenging to fly at high altitude air shows. Places like Rifle, Colorado, Denver, Truckee, the DA, density altitude at those shows can be 10,000 feet or more. You have to get there early. You have to practice 3 to 4 times just to get a feel of the airplane. The stall speed's higher. The plane, everything's the stall speed's actually not higher, but it feels like it's higher technically, but the airplane's very, very light. Like down at sea level, there's quite a bit of stick force for some of these maneuvers. You really have to, honk on it. And you get up to that altitude, if you pull too hard, the plane just breaks loose because there's no air. So those shows are very, very challenging and they're dangerous, and you really have to be ready for them, and you have to modify your routine, and you have to put your ego on hold. And you're like, God, this isn't my normal show, and I have to take 2 breaks in the show and climb and come in for the rest of it. Reno is another example, and you're like, there's all these great pilots here, and I want to fly my best at Reno. And then you look around at the other airshow pilots, you're like, no, everybody's in the same boat. We're all handicapped. Don't try and do something dumb. Just fly your normal show and take a break, because it's real hard when you're flying an air show to put that ego aside. So those are the hardest shows, I think.
Gotcha. If you had to prioritize spin training or upset training, which one would you put first?
In upset training, we usually do a spin or 2. It depends on, sometimes it depends on how they feel. But we usually try and get a couple of spins in. So it should be an integral part of an upset course, excuse me, that you would actually do a spin. I'd say either one, but if you're going to do an upset course, you should be prepared to do spins in it. At least experience 1 or 2. And normally what I find with people that have never done a spin, and you get some pretty accomplished pilots, and some of them are airline pilots, some of them are, master CFIs sometimes haven't done spins on their own. And usually after a couple of spins, they'll say, oh, that's so nothing. It's no big deal. That's the best part about it. is when people see that, because then they're like, oh, okay, I've done it. I understand it. It's no big deal. Now I'm not afraid of it anymore. So,
Awesome. Well, Patty, this is the last question for tonight.
okay.
We're almost out of time.
No, I hope I'm not
But
talking.
now, I'm sorry?
I hope I'm not talking too much. I'm losing my voice.
Oh, no, this is great. So before we started letting everybody in, you told me you learned how to fly in a float plane from the very beginning. What did you think about that overall? What is your favorite type of flying besides aerobatics, obviously?
That's aerobatics. I started in the float plane in a 185 on floats, but I didn't get my license in it. It was too much for me, and big, and it was kind of heavy, 185, and you have to reach down for the flaps,
Right.
and all that stuff. I flew it later, but I actually got my license in a beach sport. I finished it up in that. Did my check ride in that. The favorite kind of flying, I think bush flying. I love bush flying, aside from aerobatics, but aerobatics teaches you to be a good bush pilot too, slipping to the spot and all that. I love to fly in Kenya. I've been really fortunate to fly over there a number of times and fly with the Kenya Wildlife Service pilots. That's my favorite. I went over elephants and other game, giraffe, and there's nothing like that.
Cool.
That's awesome.
Not even a question, just a final parting thought. What are your thoughts for pilots of all different ranges, experience levels, anything else?
You don't have to, you don't have to just do what the FAA prescribes. Take advantage of all the great flight instruction out there and do it on your own. Don't just go by, do it. Of course, you have to go by the rules and follow the practical test standards or whatever they're called now. I think they changed them again, but take advantage of other things too, and do it on your own. Think about, like, we don't have to brush our teeth, but we do. You don't have to get upset training, but you do. And then I think my biggest motto is always leave yourself an out when you're flying. Always have something in your hip pocket, whether it's airspeed or altitude or a place to land or something. Or plug in that glide, the glide path in your fourth flight, like my friend did.
That might be the link in the chain that gets broken to prevent something from happening.
Yeah, exactly. Be prepared.
So,
right?
Exactly. So final thoughts, anything else you'd like to talk about before we close or adjourn the meeting?
Talked a lot. I really appreciate people that, I see a comment here. You can't count on luck from, I think it's your friend, the aerobatic pilot. I just saw that in the chat. You can't, I think luck does play a part, Glenn. I think it does. I know it has with a lot of my friends and people that I know. So you can't count on it though, but sometimes it plays a part. Anyway, thank you for having me.
Oh, it was a blast. It was a blast, Patty. And I just can't even begin to tell you how much I really appreciate you donating your time tonight to come be a part of this webcast. We started this webcast back when the COVID stuff started up, and we were doing these seminars in person for the last couple of years, and now I'm doing it bi-weekly, and I'm going to continue to do so from here on out every other week. And having you on board tonight to do this Q&A has been outstanding. I know that everybody, I can see the chats blowing up right now. Everybody got tremendous value out of what you said tonight. And if I would love to have you back in about 6 or 7 months, if you'd be willing to, and we can chat about that offline.
Absolutely.
So, final thoughts?
No, thank you. Thank you for having me. And
All right, Patty.
Come and see me, both of you.
I will.
Come and
I
see
will.
us.
I'm going to make that trip to St. Augustine.
It's easy.
So,
Didn't scare me, but I'll come up and see you.
We won't.
all right, I'm going to go ahead and close this out real quick. Once again, Patty, I cannot thank you enough. I cannot thank you enough, Paul, and I cannot thank you, viewers and participants, for coming to get that extra little bit of nugget of information that could help prevent something from happening in the future. Again, we are trying to break the chain on future incidents and accidents. I said, if you would, send me an email to flyallamerican@gmail.com and send the code 5302, and I will get you your wings credit. Join us 2 weeks from tonight, September 22nd at 7:30 p.m. Central Time for defensive flying with guest speaker Rod Machado. Rod will be here on September 22nd, 7:30 p.m., and he'll be discussing defensive flying. So everyone, thanks again for participating, and have a wonderful night. Take care.
Thanks, everybody.